I want to welcome you to my channel, Observer of Anomalous Objects. My name is Dale, and we're going to do something a little different today. I think you'll enjoy it. Normally, my show is all about UFOs and UAPs, but one of the things that I have discovered is in branching out and studying aliens and non-human intelligence is that there's a lot more out there than I think most of us know. And so somebody had told me about the documentary Third Eye Spies, and I started checking it out and investigating remote viewing. And at first I was skeptical, like many people are. I mean, I'm the kind of person that I want to make sure there's basis in reality if I'm going to spend time investigating something. But this one I know is true. Third Eye Spy really opened my eyes and helped me to see that was the case. And I want to take a second here, though, to thank Astro. Astro's on X, and he does a lot of podcasts. And he told me where I could find this good AI art generator. Basically, it's Midjourney. You got to have a Discord account to be able to get it. But man, I'm telling you what, the slides are just amazing when you look at them. I mean, they're just absolutely amazing. And so let me get a couple things going here that I hadn't got started. I do apologize. I know there was 2 or 3 people watching the previous video, but one of the challenges is my voice wasn't matching my lips. And so I've decided to go ahead and do this video again. So just real quick, apologize to those of you that maybe were watching that one. I just got frustrated with it and decided it was time to go back and start over. One of the things I did, I think it's pronounced Chat GPT. I decided as I was going to do some research into what remote viewing is all about, that I would, try out this new AI search engine called Chat GPT. And at first, I have to be honest with you, I was kind of frustrated. I was frustrated because of the fact that all of the programming for this artificial intelligence comes from a very scientific viewpoint. And I don't mean that science is wrong, but the problem with a lot of scientists is that they don't have any room for anything that's not of the physical world. When you start talking ESP, you start remote viewing, you start talking about UFOs or any, ghost, anything like that, it's for a lot of them, it's a no-go. And so you can imagine when I went into this program looking for information about remote viewing for this show, a lot of it was very negative. And so I mentioned that to a friend of mine, and they had said, well, just rephrase the question and just ask about remote viewing from a remote viewer's perspective. And so let me go ahead and share what I got. Was a lot better. It says remote viewing from the perspective of someone who practices it is a technique or ability that allows them to gather information about a target, location, or object without physically being present at the target. Here's how it might be explained from a remote viewer's perspective. And so the question was right. The answer is a whole lot better. And so the person who told me that, I'm definitely in gratitude for that. I want to make this clear, though. When we talk about remote viewing, it's tapping into your subconscious. There's so much going on that your conscious mind can't keep up with. And some people talk about a stream of consciousness. And I don't know if that's exactly how it is, but it's got to be close, because we all have a subconscious, which, by the way, means anyone can be a remote viewer. Now, there are some people that are just naturally talented at it, but everyone can be a remote viewer. And so one of the things that it didn't say in that statement is that time is not an issue. And in many ways, location is not an issue. You can go back in time, you can go forward in time, and I'll mention that in a little bit. And it doesn't have to just be here, things on this earth. According to some, you can remote view aliens or spacecraft. And so that's one I'd really like to do, or maybe it scare me to death, but I'd at least like to try it. Let me go ahead and continue with this as it talks about how the process of remote viewing takes place. It says, first of all, there's preparation. Remote viewers often emphasize the importance of mental and emotional preparation. They may enter a state of focused relaxation, sometimes using deep meditation or deep breathing techniques. This helps clear the mind and open it to receiving impressions. Now, this is true of any remote viewing session that I've ever heard of. It begins with a blind target. The remote viewer is typically provided with a target, but they are intentionally kept blind to the specifics of the target. This means they don't know what the target is or where it's located. The target could be a set of geographical coordinates, an image in a sealed envelope, or random numbers, for example. In fact, I have a buddy of mine, I mentioned him already, Astro. And if you haven't followed him on X, let me just encourage you to do that. He has a target reveal every week. And so he'll have an envelope. And so what you have to do is try to figure out what's in that envelope. Now, let me make this clear about what remote viewing is and what it isn't. Remote viewing is not 100%. It's percentages. And the better you get at it, the higher your percentages go. In fact, I did a session, not for this week, but for last week, and my image was way off. But there were certain things that I wrote down that were in the picture. In fact, I talked about a face, and I couldn't figure out if it was a human face or an animal face. And then when I talked about the eyes, I couldn't figure out if it was animal, alien, or reptile. And when I finally saw the picture, it was an image of a half moon, and inside that half moon was a human type looking creature, but it was kind of distorted. And so I can understand why, if that part of my session was accurate, that would be that. I put down the color yellow. There were color yellows, but like I said, I got the drawing all wrong. And I'm a beginner at it. And so I'm hoping as I get better, I'll get more and more things correct. But I've noticed that there seems to be a little bit of a talent, in that I seem to get a lot of things right, although I get things wrong as well. The next thing they say is psychic impressions. During the remote viewing session, the practitioner begins to receive psychic impressions. These impressions can take various forms, including mental images, sensations, emotions, colors, sounds, or even symbolic representations. Remote viewers describe their impressions as coming from their subconscious or from some form of extrasensory perception. Now, this is one of the reasons I know that remote viewing is true, that I know that there is extrasensory perception. And I've shared a video about this, and some of you have seen it. But I've experienced this a few times in my life. I experienced it as a pastor. I used to pray to the Holy Spirit to lead me to whatever my sermon was going to be that day, that week, whatever it was going to be. And every week there would be like something, I would see it. It was like this impression came to me, and I knew that's what I was supposed to preach on. But what surprised me is the next time something like that happened, it had nothing to do with the Holy Spirit. Well, maybe it's the Holy Spirit, but anyway, nothing to do with church, nothing to do with the sermon. But I was out golfing with a friend of mine. We were on hole number 11, and he had hit his ball off to the left in the hazard area. And as we walked out there, this impression came to me, and just kind of like you heard that. It wasn't audible. It wasn't like words, but this impression just came on me. I said I was going to find a Titleist Pro V1 golf ball. And I almost told my buddy Kurt about it, but I didn't want to sound crazy, And so I kept my mouth shut. And when we got over there, Kurt found his golf ball. And so I only had a little bit of time to look. But I look, and all of a sudden I see this white object on the ground, and I move this leaf away, and it's a Titleist golf ball. And I remember looking at it, thinking to myself, what are the odds? And I said, and I rotated it. And I was just absolutely blown away when it said Pro V1. It was the exact ball that this impression told me I would find. It was the only ball I found at the time. I mean, it wouldn't have been anything spectacular if it had just said a golf ball. I mean, you're going to find golf balls in golf courses, but this was a specific golf ball, a specific Titleist golf ball. And so that's kind of the way I understand it and the way I've experienced. And so, you may not believe it, other people may not believe it, but I know it's true because I have experienced it. Now, here's the next process of remote viewing. There is the data collection, and it talks about the remote viewer records their impressions as they come without judging or analyzing them. And so as the pieces come together, you don't try to put a picture together. You just write down what comes to you. Later on in the target reveal, the picture's going to be there for you, and you're going to know how accurate you are. If you try to do it premature, you're liable to go off of target as well. And so it talks about the notes may be in forms of sketches, written description, or verbal recordings. The goal is to capture as much information as possible. Sometimes people can get off target. I'm reading a book by Lynn Buchanan, and he talked about, the guys that were paid to do this, and we'll get into that in a minute, by the government. Sometimes they would go into a setting to look at a target, and there was something there that was more interesting than the target. And so you also have a controller there who's to make sure you stay on target. He's going to keep asking you questions to make sure that you stay on target. But anyway, they have what you call ideograms, which are simple, quick sketches that represent a concept or impression, which can help the viewer access information more directly. And then, of course, at the end, there's the analyst and feedback. After the remote viewing session, the viewer or trained analyst review the recorded data and try to match it up with the actual target. This is a crucial step for assessing the accuracy of the remote viewing. It may involve comparing the recorded impressions with the known details of the target. And so that's all interesting. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you something now I think you'll find interesting. This is actually a document that was originally classified as secret, and it was approved for release. You can see, I think it's 2005. And so it's quite a few years afterwards. But if you can see the date, and I'm not sure you can, let me see if I can put the mouse up there. That's the date. It is April 1st, 1983. And it's about a briefing that the then Vice President of the United States, George Bush, who became the first Bush president, where he was being briefed, and it had like a 30-minute briefing where he found it impressive, very, very interesting and impressive. And so this is one of the documents that we have that show us that the government took this very, very seriously. As we talk about our government getting involved with remote viewing, it really began with the Stanford Research Institute, which is another of the things that caught my attention. I don't know if I've mentioned this, because remember, this is the second time I've made this video, but in the documentary Third Eye Spies, they are actually showing the Stanford Research Institute. And when I say Stanford, I'm talking about the Stanford University. I mean, this is a prestigious university, and they're doing research on psychic abilities, and especially they're going to zone in and specialize on remote viewing. That's where they're going to go. And you say, well, why in the world would our government get involved with something like psychics and ESP and remote viewing? Well, there's a good reason for it, because about 1970, I think it was 1970, in fact, the CIA learned that the Soviet Union was spending 60 million rubles annually on what they called psychotronic, which is the stuff I'm talking about right now. And so, they started thinking, we're hearing that this stuff's working for them, and so we don't want them to have a competitive edge over us. And so we better get in this as well. We better get involved. And so in somewhere around 1972, that's when Russell Tark and Hal Puthoff, and by the way, it's the same Hal Puthoff from To the Stars Academy, with DeLong and all the others, Lou Elizondo. He was part of that. If you I think he was part of the OSAP investigation, at least one of the UFO government investigation programs. I know he was involved with one of them. And so he's pretty prestigious. But the first person they looked at was somebody by the name of Yuri Geller, and he was an Israeli that was famous for bending spoons. The problem was there are people that just thought he was an absolute fraud. In fact, I've heard people say there is a technique to being able to make spoons bend. And so I'm not in the middle of it. I don't know which way or the other. All I can tell you is that the a professor by the name of Ray Hyman, and he was a professor of psychology at the University of Oregon. By the way, go Ducks, go Ducks. Was asked by the Air Force psychologist, Lieutenant Colonel Austin Kibler, to go out and to evaluate Geller to see if this was legit or not. And the problem was he thought he was a fraud. And so the funding from the government was shut down, and they had to basically start over. The research would still be done at Stanford University, but they had to get money from a different way. And so what they did is they had Russell Tark and Hal Puthoff got together with Ingalls Swan, which I'll mention him in a second, and they went on a campaign tour to try to get funding for this. And so there were, in the early days, 1972 and following, there were really three big remote viewers that were involved with this program, and Ingalls Swan was one of them. In fact, a lot of people believe that he is probably the greatest remote viewer of all time. And he's like one of those that has a natural gift at being able to do that. And so we have Ingalls Swan, who's one of them. Then we have a gentleman by the name of Pat Price. That's him here, and just put a face on Hal Puthoff and Russell Tark. There they are right there. And so this was another one of the key three. And then number three, which ironically, his name is Joe McMonagle, he was known as Viewer 001. And so I believe he was trained by Ingalls Swan himself. So to me, Ingalls Swan should have been 001, but I guess he was the trainer and not necessarily the viewer in this case. Although Ingalls Swan had made some pretty big claims on things that he remote viewed, and I'll let you look up that, especially the one about Mars and a million years back. Remember what we talked about remote viewing. It's not limited by time. It can go back in time. It can go forward in time. It's not stuck just in the time we're living in and stuff. So Joe has a book called Mind Trek. It's one of the three books that I own and I'm in the process of reading, and also connected to the Monroe Institute. And that's why I ordered the book from. But these were the big three. This is where it began, where the CIA and the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agencies, got together and said, you know what, we need to study this. If the Soviets are doing it, we need to do this. And so they were working for the government. But eventually it would be moved to Fort Meade about 1978, and they would be using military personnel, mostly officers. But I'm going to mention Lynn Buchanan in a minute. No, wait a minute. Yeah, he was the enlisted man, the only, I believe, enlisted man. But when it went to Fort Meade and it became an Army project, it was given the name the Stargate Project. Now, I want to give you some of the different nicknames over the years for this Stargate Project. Eventually, it was officially called the Stargate Project in 1991. But there were a lot of different code names. And there were reasons for these code names, because what would happen is, you can imagine some of the conservative Christians that were, alive back then. And so when they heard about ESP and clairvoyance and remote viewing and all that, you can imagine the controversy that would have created. And so what would happen is, the word would eventually get out about a program, and so somebody would push back and they'd have to shut that program down, and then they'd reopen it under another name. So let me give you a few of the different names they have for those different places or code names. It was Gondola Wish, Stargate, not same as Stargate Project, Grill Flame. Then you had Center Lane, you had Project CF, Sunstreak, and Scanet. And so, like I said, all of those were different names, and there, I mean, possibly a few more, but all of those would fall under the umbrella of this big project that they would later on name the Stargate Project. And so we had these project going. Lieutenant Frederick Atwater, also known as Skip, that was his name. He was in charge of it, and he was accountable to General Albert Stubblebine. And this guy is quite the character. In fact, you're going to see his character put in public display in the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. I think it was a 2009 movie that came out. In some ways, they make remote viewing look stupid, but the reality is that some of the stuff in the movie was 100% true. In fact, I had mentioned General Stubblebine, that he in the movie would try to run through walls, and of course he'd fall backwards and stuff. But I'm reading in real life, this guy actually did that. Now, the main character of the movie was a guy named Lynn Cassidy, played by George Clooney. And I was watching, and so he's representing Lynn Buchanan. Let me go ahead and show you who that is real quick. He's the author of the book, The Seventh Sense. It's one of the books I'm reading right now, but I heard him being interviewed about that book, and he made it clear that it was a compilation of different characters. And so some of it was him. They used him as the main character, but it was really a bunch of other characters and their stories combined with his, because they didn't have enough time in the movie to really do the stories of each one of these individuals. And so they took what they had done and put it all under this one character named Lynn Cassidy, but really it was based off of Lynn Buchanan. Let me go ahead and play a clip for you from
that
him.
Had real world implications for intelligence operations.
Yeah, there was a general that was captured by the Red Brigade. I forget which viewer it was in the unit, drew the floor plans of the building where the hostage was being held, so that the people could go in and rescue him without getting him killed. And we were able to do that. In fact, one of my students this last year was shown the roof of a building and correctly and pretty accurately described the floor plan inside the building, everything that was going on in each room, the personnel, all the equipment that was in each room, just from a picture of a roof.
And so, like I said, that was a clip by Lynn. I guess that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And so he was the main character in The Men Who Stare at Goats. Probably the most colorful person in that was the character played by Jeff Bridges. And his name was, the name he gave him in the movie anyway, was Bill Django. And he was actually taking the place of a gentleman, Lieutenant Colonel James Chalon. And I think I pronounced that correctly. It's one of those weird pronunciation. And he was the one who started the 1st Earth Battalion. And it was kind of like a hippie thing. And I think James said he didn't really care for the way they portrayed him as a drunk and other things. But he definitely was a colorful person. And I think there probably was some small similarities between the two. I'm familiar a little bit with him from TED 2. He's very much interested in saving the planet. I'm not sure. I think maybe he's passed on, but I know he was living in Hawaii. He was trying to live sustainable off of the land. But at TED 2, he was challenging the next generation to take us to the next level. He says, we have all the communication now around the world. And so it's their job to be able to help take us the rest of the way about trying to save this planet. And very, very interesting character. And then we have good old Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey played Ed Dames. And he was just not a person that was very likable in the movie. In fact, he was pretty easy to hate the guy with the character that he portrayed. Now, I'm not so sure that that's 100% accurate of who the guy is in real life, because I know he's trained some other remote viewers who I'm aware of. I think the Area 52 guy is one of them, and they seem to be highly qualified, seem to be doing very, very well with that. And so those are all the main characters, the main storyline, if you want to say, about remote viewing. How did it start? Where did it go? Now, the truth of the story is that about 1995, they eventually shut down the Stargate project. At least that's what they said. And the official story is that they didn't really find anything significant. Although if you research it and you study it, you're going to find that there's a lot of stuff that they did. And I'm going to say you can bet your last dollar on this, that there's some form of the Stargate project going on somewhere in the military, either CIA or DIA, somewhere out there. Now, I know that it's easy to look at something that's new, as something that's kind of outside of your paradigm, and criticize it. But I really think this is true for anything. You need to go and investigate something before you criticize it. You hear me today? You really need to go investigate it. Now, I'll be honest, I was guilty of that. Being a pastor, anything to do with ESP or clairvoyance or even aliens. I mean, that stuff was kind of like, okay, how do you fit all that in the Bible? Or, in fact, the ESP and all that stuff would just label it demon. I mean, if you want to shut down a conversation, just call it demonic. Just say that's demons and stuff. But I really believe that if you go out and investigate remote viewing, I think you're going to be surprised. And as people said, that everybody has access to it. I find it interesting. I don't think we're channeling demons. I don't think it has anything to do with that at all. I think it's about our subconscious mind and whether there's a consciousness that flows out there and that we're able to tap into it as well. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's just one of those videos I felt like I need to share with you what I found. And I really hope that you enjoyed it. It's just introductory, just skin deep, but at least now you know how remote viewing started, how the government got involved because of the Soviets. You know that it started with Stanford Research Institute, eventually was added to 1978 with Fort Meade and the Army getting involved with it, with the First Earth Battalion Field Manual, these super soldiers that they were creating. And so at least you have a feel for what it's about, who the main characters were. And anyway, thank you for watching the video.